Marlon, you can proceed when you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. As the chairman of SAMED, I would like to welcome everybody to the 2021 annual conference. Over the next few days, we encourage your participation in educational discussions on regulations, innovation, ethics, market access, transformation, and the NHI. Our conference theme this year is Growing MedTech Post-Pandemic, Adaptability, Resilience, and Sustainability, which speaks to the last 2 years in which we have not only as MedTech, but the entire healthcare system have had to navigate a very different and often challenging landscape. Recognize the way the MedTech industry negotiated and was impacted by the challenges of the healthcare systems, from testing to treatment, and how we've been able to help patients and customers navigate this very difficult landscape. So SAMED and its members remain united in our commitment to collaboration, to innovation, and securing access to life-saving technologies that help serve the needs of patients. As we come away from this challenging year and a half, this is a chance to look ahead and plan for what comes next. Some highlights from this year's program will include looking at innovations in MedTech, what the trends are, what the opportunities are, especially as we work our way back from the COVID pandemic. It's about capacitating the healthcare sector through many transformations initiatives. It's about global harmonization of medical device regulations, effects, global fees, and DRGs, the impact on market access. Lastly, in particular, we'll look at the NHI and what that means to our industry for their leadership and contribution in putting the program. I'd like to thank each of you to South Africa, Vuyisile. So now I would like to welcome the attendees and our panel to the first session of the 2021 SAMED annual conference. Just a reminder that the theme of the conference is Growing MedTech Post-Pandemic, Adaptability, Resilience, and Sustainability. You don't know me, I'm Marlon Burgess, I'm chair of SAMED, and I will be facilitating the session, which will be in MedTech trends and opportunities. Hold off the questions until the end to give each of our panelists a chance to open. The ongoing pandemic continues to challenge and change the healthcare environment. MedTech became a part of everyday life for the public during this pandemic. R&D and the need created by COVID-19 further catapulted MedTech into the spotlight. In this session, we'll look at the resilience of the MedTech industry, where the growth and opportunities are, and what the sustainable MedTech trends are globally. We'll give each panelist 5 to 7 minutes to introduce their topic before we into a panel discussion. We'll start our discussion with Dr. Terry Parlett, who is Commercialization Director at Cambridge Enterprise. Terry is responsible for the commercialization and diffusion of life science and health-related technologies and research arising from the University of Cambridge through the creation of new companies, licensing relationships, and partnerships. In the past year, Terry has been responsible for the commercialization of several Cambridge technologies, including the licensing of stem cell products, and cancer risk prediction tools, and the development of investment opportunities in the fields of influenza and Ebola vaccines, and a number of opportunities related to cell therapy. Dr. Parlett, we look forward to hearing about what you have to share about innovation and partnering with academia. Over to you, Dr. Parlett.
Thank you very much, Marlon, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak here today. So you're absolutely right. Obviously, the initial shock of the COVID pandemic has presented sort of some challenges, obviously, to the medtech industry, but also probably quite a lot of opportunity as well. This is particularly seen with the acceleration of trends that were probably already underway anyway, particularly in terms of telemedicine and remote monitoring and consultation. But obviously COVID has launched that and had to launch that hard once the pandemic hit. And noticeably this connected health agenda has really gone up the charts. So we're in a future which maybe is smarter, more agile, more pervasive. You know, the standalone technology product perhaps is now being subsumed by things that are end-to-end and pathway driven. Got an eye on data analytics throughout, and obviously having the consumer and the physician joined together in quite an unusual place, I think, where it's almost, in some cases, the patient is calling for the doctor rather than sort of the doctor saying, wait, I'll call you. We are in a new paradigm. If we can move on to the next slide, that'd be great. And I'll show you some of the trends that I think are coming forward. Okay, a bit of formatting error here. Okay, but we've got the picture. So where is the future direction of medtech going? Well, I'll come on to these in a bit more detail, but probably AI and machine learning. Is this new to anyone? Probably not. Data analytics and IT enablers, I'll touch on those a little bit more because I think there are things out there which are enabling the technology to become more adoptable by institutions and be able to interconnect between data systems much better. And telemedicine, of course, which is a huge area now for medtech. And of course, there's implantables. That, of course, cuts across with telemedicine, arguably cuts across with robotics, and probably cuts across with nanotechnology as well, particularly in sort of the coatings that can be placed on these to make them becoming more pervasive. In fact, remote robotics is becoming more pervasive too. As well as obviously artificial limbs and brain interfaces.
You can join by that thing. I'll demote you to an attendee when I see you. Apologies.
Caroline, I think Caroline, thank you. Anyway, technology, so the coatings we put on things to make things more biocompatible themselves and kills, for example, nanotechnology particles which can be reacted by light from your own cells to kill cancer cells. We've got additive manufacturing, in other words, 3D printing. Which is looking at personalized devices or regional 3D printing, coatings that could be applied to our medical devices, which are personalized to the patient. And of course, cell and gene therapy, which here at Cambridge has really exploded. We've got delivery devices, perhaps where the medtech sector would come into that. Certainly, we're working with medtech companies on delivery devices for cell therapies. Manufacturing tools and bioreactors, but in essence, that area of technology is growing as well. And of course, I put down here marketing, because I think we've seen over the COVID pandemic how direct sort of how companies on products, so Medtronic or Stryker or anybody else are literally appealing directly to the consumer, not to the physician, which I find interesting. But in course of all of this landscape and all of this geography of innovation, there's some things that we have to think about. You know, what's the user clinician acceptance and how they're going to be trained on some of this technology? Is this huge volume of data coming towards clinicians actionable? You know, do they have the time in the day to actually look at this stuff? You know, what about procurement and reimbursement? How are sort of digital technologies reimbursed and paid for? You know, payment by results, how will that be calculated in a digital world? Where does legal liability and regulation stop and begin if you've got an AI technology? Who is responsible for that? But of course, it brings lots of new opportunities, particularly with collaborative models, sort of a shift between the digital health sector at the outset, certainly of digital health coming through the market, but now they could be essential partners in the mix with the digital health partner knowing how it works with the consumer, and obviously on the other side, the medtech they know how the device works. So these sorts of collaborative models could come together. And as a consumer, I think it's growing. Next slide, please, Caroline. Next slide. See if I can share mine. Here we go. Thank you. So I'll focus on those top three: connected health, and I'll quickly just sort of zoom through these. But we've seen it's cool, but people like mental health to now push. For example, these are companies in the UK where you can literally dial up a doctor. So for during perhaps you'll talk first of all to the AI machine to find out perhaps who the best physician or GP is to talk to you, or perhaps to alert the pharmacy or to alert emergency services even if needed. So that's something that I think will be coming down the line in the next 10 years. We've got augmented reality and virtual reality products. So for not just for patient consultations, but also mental health interventions such as aversion therapy, using virtual reality to put them into a place and put them into scenarios that could be helpful for their mental health. Remote surgery. We've got you know, haptic feedback from one country to another. We've got the HoloLens, where producing, you know, vital signs in front of the clinician's eyes, or indeed providing visualization of veins or visualization of internal organs, which have been pre-prepared via a CT image. Lots of obviously opportunities there. And of course, sensors and these implantables, the Internet of Things connected wearables, from wristbands that you'll probably all know just from a Fitbit, through to textile sensors that are embedded into clothes, perhaps to measure your activity, your EKG, your ECG, depending where you're putting these things, all the way down to your fridge magnets and your bathroom mirrors, looking at you to assess whether you are healthy or not, or whether you could do with a shot of something. And of course, all of these products, such as, you know, the oximetry, which is already there on your mobile phone, which can determine perhaps ECG, you know, as accurately as a medical device can, or at least within 1%, as one previous study has concluded. Or glucose monitoring. Yes, implants that we've seen to sort of monitor that in your blood, but also we're now seeing one of Cambridge's inventions even is a contact lens, which can determine what your glucose level is. And of course, digital pills. So another one actually used in mental health to determine whether sort of users have swallowed their medication that morning. Then we've got some other big stuff. Of course, AI and machine learning, where's that going? Well, massively in diagnostics and imaging. That is where AI and machine learning certainly is at the moment. And that's where the first movers will be in looking at images and triaging those for a radiographer. So a radiographer can determine and have selected for them the most pressing images, the most important ones that may, say, contain a cancer, is put to the top of the list by the AI machine by analysing images. And this stuff is coming to the fore. We've just spun out a prostate cancer imaging company using machine learning and AI to do that. And of course, there's drug discovery tools and research tools that go along with that AI in order to perhaps find some new cures as well. And of course, AI is great for quality control, again, to make sure results and analysis are done properly from devices. And then we've got some of the enablers, data analytics and IT, a huge amount of data out there. We saw that in the COVID pandemic, actionable data that can be used to determine perhaps what even the supply of PPE should be to certain regions. But things like blockchain will improve the security for the user and for those that donate their data. Providing permissions online, providing sets of permissions pre-prescribed. Maybe you can analyze my DNA, you can't analyze my DNA. You can contact me for a clinical trial, or you can't contact me for a clinical trial. So all of these sort of data intensive tools will come to the fore, I think. And certainly we're using them in Cambridge to recruit clinical trial patients through one of our companies, Sano Genetics. We've got quantum computing, of course, which is coming down the line, which is going to be, of course, a very powerful tool for analysing genomic data, particularly where you have to analyse someone's genome very quickly, or indeed, again, potentially for drug discovery. Next slide, please. And final slide. So what do you want? So what is the future of innovation? Well, one thing I do know is that if you just internally innovate, I mean, you may have brilliant.
Shouldn't you be writing that to say that you get resistance from one degree with you guys, you've developed this.
Okay, I think I'm back.
Go ahead, Doctor.
It's all right, Marlon.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry. But anyway, you get this. What do you want to do with your innovation landscape? You know, there's a lot of ideas that come from internal navel gazing, where we think, where's our next product coming from? How do we improve our current medtech offering? But also, that's where you lead to that plantation. You are planting those products and those seeds, which is fantastic. But where do you find that novel plant, that thing that is unique or special? That's where your rainforest sits, and that's where actually those innovators from your local universities, local SMEs will probably be on the cutting edge. And those are the people who you should be collaborating with as a business. Who has the ideas, and how and receptive are they, and how can they be engaged? But there will be the new partnerships, of course, those that spring from digital health or consumer tech companies who know how to handle people's data, that know how to get to the patient interface with them, coach them and inform them. And with medtech companies providing hardware, together may form their own new joint ventures, affiliate agreements, and indeed spin-outs, which may then service the industry with the expertise of one company bolted together with the expertise of another. So digital meets hardware. Equally, there's the traditional innovation pathways between SMEs and industry and universities, which could be co-developed products, where one party may, you know, put in their in-kind contribution and the other party put in their in-kind contribution to create something new and hopefully sharing the proceeds. Or sponsored research from industry or SMEs, sponsoring targeted research that is according to their research plan. Or indeed just straight knowledge exchanges with change of people, or setting up of events where, again, things can be exchanged, ideas can be grown. And indeed, centres of excellence can be a great place for those SMEs and industry to sort of have a front door into the university sector. And of course, there's open innovation, where you can just put it all out there for free, or perhaps under some certain terms out on the web for free. This was extremely effective during the pandemic, of course. At Cambridge, we put out visors, we put out ventilator plans, we put out blueprints for PPE, everything that you can imagine, including drug and therapeutics and diagnostics even, that we gave freely, obviously, to the world, as everyone else did, I think, realizing the challenge that you have to meet the public need. And sometimes you can't do sort of open innovation and the open source for during the pandemic. Whether or not this is a temporary effect, I don't know. I think in terms of software, it's probably a permanent one. In terms of medtech companies or universities putting their latest innovations and blueprints online, I'm not so sure. But certainly it's been a huge bonus during the pandemic and has helped, as I said, Cambridge itself get its own innovations out there to the world to be made. And in all of this, of course, is there a government role to put SMEs and industry and the academic sector together? Well, there probably is. There's incentives like translational funding, there's R&D tax credits, but also other incentives that governments can give to try and get companies to collaborate together, not just all through taxation, but also through pump priming and investing themselves into areas where there could be growth in future. So do you want a plantation? Probably better to collaborate and get some of the rainforest in there and then turn that into a plantation. Okay, that's the talk over from me. Back to you, Marlon.
Thank you, Dr. Parlett, for that very exciting and inspiring talk on innovation. I'm sure there are many members of the audience who have lots of questions for you. I can think of our local manufacturing industry, MDMSA. Then we've got our Department of Trade and Industry, and one of the speakers on our panel is from the innovation sector as well. So I'm sure there'll be lots of engagement a little bit later. So thank you for that. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Marlon.
Okay, so next is Mr. Amit Lev, who is the Trade and Investment Manager and head of the economic mission with the Israeli Embassy in South Africa. So the mission's role is to enhance business collaboration between Israel and South Africa companies and attract investments from SA to Israel and vice versa, and to promote trade and R&D agreements in the region. So, Mr. Lev, we look forward to your talk, and over to you.
Thank you, Marlon, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I really feel that this is my bread and butter environment. We're talking about innovation and talking about the next trends, and this is really it's a name for Israel and for companies. Just a few words about the trade mission. So we are part of the Ministry of Economy in Israel. We are helping and assisting to facilitate meetings and business collaboration between Israeli and South African companies from all sectors. We will focus today on the medical, but it's from agricultural up to consumer goods. And Israel is a really a world leader when it comes to innovation. Just today, they announced in Israel that they set a new record for investments. That's almost $18 billion for investments in Israeli companies in the last 9 months. Medtech around 500 companies from all areas, from monitoring and clinical overflow and patients and etc. and engagement. And it's really, when you're talking about innovation and trends, because of the uniqueness of the Israeli ecosystem, you really can find a lot of things there and to see what the world is going to. So as a side note, we as the trade mission will be glad to talk with either companies, end users, distributors, and to help them to find the relevant solutions as partner of the Israeli innovation. Now, I'm going to repeat the same things as Dr. Terry said, and there's a lot there that we can dive in, and I'm sure we're going to do it. I think that one of the things the pandemic has changed is the adoption of technologies that we see, and this is something that I'm sure also we'll see now in South Africa, because about getting new technologies and things like that. But the pandemic pushed a lot of organizations to be more and more active and to take those kind of technologies and to use them because they don't have any choice anymore. We just see like in Israel, there's like a hospital monitoring the beginning. They got the the instruction from the Ministry of Health to say, okay, you need to be more to track those kind of patients and etc. In 10 days, they were able to implement the system, and this is something that gives a lot of hope to a lot of companies all over the world, kind of markets. But now this is why we see a lot of investors putting money into it, because they're understanding that this is the new era. If you have a technology and it's good, you have much more chances to get it in. Obviously, something else is that home care is becoming a big thing. Now it's that you're looking about the healthcare. So hospitals are becoming the last point for people that they don't have any other choice. We saw that in the corona that hospitals are crowded, there's no beds, so you have to get how to open the home cares. We see it like these technologies around the home care that can develop and give it as much as possible patients to the home care facilities. This is the new future. And to the specific, this is what I need, this is what I have, and how you can help me. Today, you will have all the data, and you can give them specifically the medicine that maybe another patient, different type of treatment because of the specific parameters of the specific patient. And this is something that increased during the COVID, that we understand, okay, that you need to take care of people, but you also need to give them the personalization, especially in home care, that people are, in their home, you have all the parameters on them, and you can get an access for that quickly. I think that another thing, and it's just something that happened in the last week in Israel, is that cyber. So great, everything is connected. Everything is digital. Now we can do it remotely, but now we are much more exposed to cyber attacks. And if 2 years ago, cyber for hospitals were something, far-fetched, you say, okay, I will get there in some point. Today, it's no longer, something that you can say, okay, it's not part of it. You have to take this for consideration. And in Israel, in the last week, there was a major cyber attack on hospital in Israel. It's called Hillel Yafe, that all their services were shut down for a few days. And not just the servers and everything and the services, also the backup was hacked and was shut down. So, and we saw what happened with Transnet here. And unfortunately, it's question of time when it will come also to the hospitals here in South Africa. So this is something that you cannot ignore. And we know that people don't know that, but it's not just, it was attack on a lot of hospitals in Israel. It's one that was hacked, but at least 9 hospitals were under attack at this specific time. So it's coming, and it's something that people not just need to have the equipment for that, but also I think the first stage is to sit with the management and to put like scenarios, what you're going to do if those systems are going to be down, how are you going to operate, and etc. I think one of the rules now in hospitals and clinics that are getting more and more attention is the CIO, the Chief Information Officer. And Dr. Cherry spoke about it, that the big data analytics is something that is becoming very valuable. And how do you create those kind of benefits from the data? And this is why hospitals need to look today about the CIO in a hospital or in a clinic, and to say, okay, this is what I need, and what areas of responsibility. And usually it should be like in every other corporate, the CIO that reports directly to the CEO, to the board, and will give them, what kind of data, what kind of infrastructure you need to extract the data, and etc. So you cannot ignore it and say, okay, I have the doctors and things like that, and the CIO. And you need also, and we saw that in hospitals in Israel and also in the States, it's working very well, is that you have appointed an innovation POC at the hospital, at the clinic, because it's very hard to implement those kind of technologies from the user side, from the doctors. They need to get used to those kind of things. They need to build a trust relationship with the technology. and you need to have someone to push it from their end. So you need to create this kind of incentives, this kind of programs to find a champion that will push it forward. And another two things that I want to speak about is, first of all, it's the trend of bring your own devices. We saw that in other places, in other sectors, that now is going also to hospitals and the healthcare. So you can use your own device as a layer for, for the treatment, for things like that. We see like a company, for example, as a mobile ODT, that they're doing a kind of treatment of cancers, that you can, there is a specific device that you can put on your cell phone, and then it's becoming a medical device. So especially in Africa, especially in South Africa, that could give you a lot much more access to technology through those kind of things, and you don't need to buy something that's designated for the specific hospital. Now, the last thing, and I'm sure we can elaborate about it in discussion, and it's something that I never thought will be a thing before the COVID, is how to fight against healthcare. People talking about vaccine, I will take it. No, there's doing like that and that, and a lot of fake news is running in the systems. And I think that companies that can come, although it's not directly as a medical devices, but companies that can come and build a system and platforms that will help to mitigate those fake news will get a lot of tractions, from government, from regulations, also from customers that they know that they can rely on. So this is really in a nutshell. We'll be glad again to discuss more in details. And if people here in the conference want to be in touch with us, they are welcome to just to type in Google Israeli Trade Mission to South Africa and our website, and we'll be glad to have in-depth discussions. Thank you.
Thank you for that talk, Mr. Lev. And I'm well aware of Israel's capability in innovation, and especially in the medtech environment. But I mean, that stat you just mentioned before, 18 billion in 9 months, that's incredible. I mean, that must be like right up there in terms of world innovation. So I'm sure many countries, including South Africa, can learn a lot from what Israel is doing. So thanks for your talk, and I'm looking forward to the questions from the panel.
Thanks.
After all the panelists have done their presentations. Okay, so I think with that we'll move right along. And next up is Dr. Vuyisile Phehane, who is an executive for bioeconomy at the TIA, or the Technology Innovation Agency, as we know it. He's responsible for driving the bioeconomy strategy for South Africa. He has, through his career, advised on enterprise development, new venture creation, equity transactions, and economic development using intellectual property, or IP, as we know it. So, Dr. Phehane, we look forward to giving us the South African perspective, and please proceed with your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our guests and delegates. I'm honored to be asked to speak at the Summit 2021 annual conference. My name is Vuyisile Phehane, the Executive for Bioeconomy at the Technology Innovation Agency in South Africa. We invest in innovations, develop intellectual property, and we commercialize intellectual property. Our unique role in the national system of innovation is to de-risk innovations for follow-on funding. So perhaps if I may ask that Caroline, that you take us to the next slide. So what has changed with the epidemic? Colleagues, much has changed. However, the key ones, there could be more, are that we've seen a global increase in diagnostic testing. And this is simply because many countries were unprepared for this latest pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, particularly our least developed economies. Services most severely affected, particularly in South Africa, were antenatal visits before 20 weeks, access to contraceptives, and particularly HIV and TB testing. Next slide. We've also seen globally an increase in the deployment of data-driven tools by physicians, particularly those physicians wishing to deliver value-added services. And some data follows on just in terms of where this was recorded in the USA. Certainly medical devices increase in demand, ventilators, diagnostics, and PPE, particularly the advantages and opportunities for open source equipment design. In South Africa, we responded to this, particularly through our Science Council, the CSR, and certain higher education institutions such as University of Johannesburg and the Witwatersrand University, to national calls for these ventilators, diagnostics, and PPE. Definitely, there's been a surge in telemedicine and remote patient care interventions as a result of the inability of people to move freely because of lockdown restrictions. This, for example, was facilitated by examples of the FDA lowering the standards for behavioral therapy and devices around April 2020. Medtech careers have certainly surged. People are now putting up platforms for education and training in point of care technologies. Next slide. Global value chains have certainly been disrupted. Certain companies who initially elected China to be their production center have migrated their business to Europe. Of course, this was in recognition of certain cost implications. What this meant is that territories had to now think about local manufacturing of these medical devices and medicines. Certainly, we saw new cost-effective and innovative surgical equipment being introduced into the world, and of course, the advancement of surgery through robotics. New business models were definitely implemented. For example, at the beginning of 2020, 80% of US physicians were not using virtual health. 6 months later, in the same year, there was a 95% increase in the use of virtual technology. And so this, in essence, speaks to new business models being innovated by certain businesses. Next slide, please. Venture funding, we saw an increase in venture funding in 2020, particularly from the life sciences focused venture capital companies. And the number there is 16.8 billion rand, signaling long-term interests and investments in healthcare innovation. Next slide. This slide is really around growth expectations and opportunities. And really what this demonstrates is the number of deals in the first half of 2021 has in essence surpassed all deals made in the last year. And the purpose of this slide is really to demonstrate by an example of Quidel, which is one of many examples, which was granted emergency use application by the FDA. What then happened was an increase of over 300% in the valuation of this particular company. In essence, demonstrating, colleagues, that with increased valuation as a result of COVID, certain opportunities arose. For example, the valuations of certain companies that had point-of-care diagnostic tests for detecting COVID-19 infection. Next slide. We will certainly see in the future artificial intelligence being used more and more for consumer-focused, prevention-first approach to healthcare and analytics. More and more data scientists are now looking at algorithms and machine learning for personalized healthcare, in essence, to drive costs downwards. Examples of these are from Deloitte, the cognitive care to cure solution. But of course, as businesses now evolve, certain technologies have come through AI, in essence, looking at how we can manage workforces smartly. And I've given two examples of Globus AI and MedAware, in essence, ensuring that there's efficiency and matching of appropriate healthcare providers to tasks, in essence, preventing fraud and wasteful expenditure management. This is, in essence, a very big opportunity for us in Africa, considering that we now have access to technologies that may be licensed in to leapfrog us as Africans and to address this terrible curse of unemployment within our economies. Next slide, please. This slide is just an example of certain new diagnostic tests. More of these are expected to come onto the market. And I've just given two, colorimetrics and Digit. These are complex diagnostics, colleagues, which in essence increase value to the patient. More of these are certainly due to come onto the market. We'll certainly see, which is quite obvious, as some of the other colleagues have presented, an increase in the use of point-of-care technologies. However, what we're also seeing is an increase in the diagnosis of non-communicable diseases as a result of the opportunities presented by the surge in point-of-care technologies for infectious diseases. This allows us, of course, to now detect non-communicable diseases earlier and more accurately, and this has a direct bearing on the life expectancy of people, but also medical aid support. Next slide, please. A very busy slide, but the point to be made is that there are certain expectations as far as the growth of startups in medtech is concerned, and the opportunity presented going forward as a result of the developments globally with the advent of COVID. Ultimately, what this means is that the sector will mature, there will be growth, we will see an increase in the availability of data and the advancement of science and technology. This is a summary slide of trends, in essence highlighting new AI applications, nanomedicine, the adoption of telehealth, digital health unicorns coming up just in terms of the investments, big data and analytics, gene therapy, an increase in consumerism. The consumers now want to know what is being put into their bodies, and of course, precision medicine. This is a summary of the 14 trends by various publications, but this summarizes the big picture just in terms of trends. Next slide, please. Going forward in digital health in particular, we will now start seeing more research and development, on-demand healthcare, the treatment of disease, fitness and wellness, workflows, and consumer health information increasing in terms of the funded value. However, as far as the clinical indications are concerned, we will now see mental health, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, primary care, oncology, and substance use disorders being addressed, particularly through digital health. Next slide. In summary, as I mentioned early on, clinical diagnostics, we will certainly be seeing and have been seeing increases in the use of genomics powered by automation technologies. These interventions now being personalized and now going towards patient-centric approaches. This will all be underpinned by groundbreaking research and greater complexity in clinical diagnostics, all towards the value, increased value to the patients. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for us as South Africa? It means we must now be thinking more seriously about investing in the development of and deployment of digital tools and services. This allows us as a country to leapfrog. There are technologies available around the world. We can certainly be brought into the country and basically adapted for local use. It means we accelerate the integration of AI for cost reduction and competitive advantage, particularly that we will now be engaging more directly with the consumer, the end user. What this means, of course, is that there are certain risks that need to be addressed, such as patient data privacy. Of course, the advent of cybersecurity cannot be ignored, but also to ensure that as a country, we are supporting governance and policy or regulation to assist us with issues of data privacy. Data ownership and data sharing must, in essence, be talked about a bit more and be facilitated. And there's certain underlying assumptions. And in summary, it assumes then that data sharing is okay. People are happy and okay with sharing of data. That data is interoperable. We have access to services that is optional, that consumers are familiar with digital tools, and that there'll be certainly a number of scientific breakthroughs that allow data ownership and data sharing to be advanced. Next slide, please. What this means also is that as the country, South Africa, and any business operating in South Africa, companies must be crisis ready and must engage in recovery planning. This will become the norm of any business, in my view. It also means that as we now engage in more clinical trials, the clinical trial designs will need to be changed, particularly speaking to the selection of these clinical trial sites because of the restriction of movement of people. Outsourcing of production will surge. I think the data shows there that around by 2024, the medical device manufacturing outsourcing industry would rise to about $39 billion. What this means then is that for South Africa and in essence the African continent, we should be thinking quite seriously about how we position the continent to be the preferred destination for the outsourcing of production by other companies from around the world. Next slide, please. Related to that is the concept of contract manufacturing and our capabilities in the country. What this means is that as we set up more of these companies and capability around contract manufacturing, we should certainly be thinking about adaptability to changing market demands. If we have not learned anything from the COVID-19 pandemic and the requirement for the economies to adapt to these demands, there's certainly a problem. But what this means is that we should be thinking about other competing territories, the Asia-Pacific region, for example, which is defined as the best medical tech manufacturing center in the world. And of course, there's a healthy growth rate. What this means, of course, is in South Africa, we should be learning from what it is that China has done or is doing and will do as far as medical device outsourcing as the preferred destination is concerned. Next slide. It means, colleagues, that for South Africa, we should be having a long-term view on original equipment manufacturing, as we've seen in these mergers and acquisition deals. And all this means, colleagues, is that we should be thinking about a healthy innovation pipeline, because without innovation, there can certainly be no development of any economy. Next slide. So in addressing this, this slide is quite a busy slide, but what this really says is that we have, as an organization, the Technology Innovation Agency, invested in health interventions. And ultimately, this is really around how we accelerate technology development and commercialization to address some of these health challenges that we have in the country. It's all about socioeconomic value. We invest in pharma, active pharmaceutical ingredients development and drug delivery, as well as biopharmaceuticals, precision medicine, medical devices, and digital health, all of which are topical in today's discussion. Next slide, please. We have certain funding instruments that we deploy, whether it is the Technology Development Fund, a Rapid Fund, our seed fund, or pre-commercialization support. All of this through clusters and technology stations platforms and programs, all of this in essence towards building that rich pipeline of innovations, which we want to take to the market and commercialize to develop our economy. Next slide, please. We don't do this alone. We certainly have a number of partners in our industry matching fund model, which range from the private sector and also some private sector partners. All the slide says really is that we co-invest with partners. We make an investment. There's a follow-on partnership investment. The technologies that are looked at are either coming from TIA or from the public sector, but ultimately within the mandate of the Technology Innovation Agency and some of these larger funding agencies such as the IDC and the PIC. Next slide. This is an example of a few wins. The first one on the top left is an organization or a company or investment called Kappa Biosystems. This is really an investment that we made some time back as Technology Innovation Agency, which was really in the space of advanced reagents and kits for next generation sequencing. This particular opportunity, we had invested 24 million Rand and was sold on to Roche for about 3 billion Rand. On the right, top right, is an example of a diagnostic test that came out from one of our platforms. And this is really around the genomics space and genomics testing. On the bottom right is also technology that we funded through one of our platforms. And this is really around X-ray technology and that we've deployed in hospitals. On the bottom left is a technology, which is the bone morphogenic technology from a company called Altus Biologics. And this is in essence a technology that we're able to, we funded for a couple of years now and quite a large investment has gone into this. But ultimately, this is a global technology, colleagues. It has a global application. And in fact, we are now at the stage where we are now increasing our global reach as far as deployment of this technology is concerned. This is really about a technology around the repair of bone fractures in complex or even minor bone problems. Next slide. Thank you, colleagues, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Phehane, and it's so good to see all of the local innovations that you've supported over the years. And I'm sure my local manufacturing colleagues are on the call today, would like to continue the conversation with you post this event. So looking forward to that. So
thank you.
I think without any further ado, we'll get into the Q&A session. And just a reminder to all of the attendees to post your questions on the chat, and we'll address those to the panelists as they come through. So let me start with all the panelists in order. Going back to Dr. Parlett, just in terms of what we've seen with the pandemic, the smaller companies have struggled to remain in business. Larger companies have taken a wait-and-see approach in terms of investments. You know, from your perspective, what do you think would be a catalyst for re-emergence of investments into innovation and technologies going forward as we emerge from this post-pandemic environment?
Yeah, cool. That's a good question, Marlon. Definitely, and a challenging one as well, because yeah, I think growth has been patchy. I think there's some areas that have grown rapidly and have not needed actually much help. For example, we've talked about it here, that the digital health side in particular, and indeed the remote monitoring and things like this have really excelled. But it's true, other more traditional medtech companies have found it more of a struggle. But I think, you know, with innovation, and that's really a catalyst here, I think, for the medtech sector, and that may be innovation actually not just in products, and not just in that something could do something better, but also in the way that people go about their innovation. How do they engage their end users? How do they engage the procurement channels? You know, how do they connect up their medtech technology to the patient and the clinician? These kinds of innovations, you know, I think are things that would drive things, but ultimately that's what investors are looking for. They're looking for an edge. At the end of the day, an investor will place an investment because they think it will grow the company. For example, if they've got a new innovation or a new business model that can be used. And I think that's where investors look to place their money. Yes, there's catalysts in terms of government, I think, as well, that could go into this. So if we're looking, you know, just as what Vuyisile was saying there, and you know, that's amazing. That's exactly what sort of, you know, regional government support should be doing, which is to catalyze, provide funding, provide expertise, at the end of the day, to try and get these local medtech companies either in front of the right investors if they have the right products, or indeed to support and pump prime the development of new technologies or new ways of working, which then again accelerates that company further as an investment target. So, you know, there's lots of things I think government and regional agencies, yeah, for sure can do to support the ecosystem. But ultimately, it's about medtech looking back on itself, seeing the new environment that is emerging, in particular with connected health, but not just that. You know, new technologies which will attract investors and provide that form of funding that can lead them on. There's also, of course, partnerships where the small SMEs should be looking sometimes to those big industry players. The industry players, like you say, perhaps are taking a suck it and see, wait and see approach. But the SMEs should also be trying to look towards them as a potential acquisition target. Because if those new companies have got some interesting technology and they can prove and show it works, perhaps through clinical trial support, product development through those agencies, or indeed through their own bank accounts, then obviously that's going to be more attractive to the industry partner, because they are looking for innovation. Big industry is still into a merger and acquisition phase here with smaller companies. So you've got to make those smaller companies look attractive. And how do you do that? Well, obviously, yeah, by growing the bottom line and the EBIT of the company, but also, you know, new ways of working, new technologies coming on stream, and indeed utilizing some of these new technologies that are out there, for example, for either accessing patients in terms of clinical trials and getting products through the system, or indeed accessing innovation through local university partners to then sort of try and get what is the next cutting edge, what is the next big thing to develop in, get that into their product development portfolio, and again, makes them look more attractive to investors and to industry, but ultimately selling products that work better than the competition. So that's what I would say, Mark.
Thanks for that. You're giving us a lot to think about there in terms of an integrated system as we emerge from the pandemic. So we'll certainly be reaching out to you for, you know, future discussions around, you know, best practice, you know, internationally in terms of what we've seen, you know, as successful models for medtech. So thanks for your contribution there. All right. What I'd like to do is link one of the questions on the chat to Dr. Lev, to Mr. Lev. So one of the attendees has asked about, you know, how do we integrate the system of innovation in South Africa? Now, I know Israel has done this very successfully, and maybe you want to, you know, give us, you know, some indication of how Israel has integrated its innovation system and been able to achieve the kind of results you mentioned earlier in terms of the 18 billion in 9 months. I mean, so you have to have a integrated system in order to do that. So maybe you should talk to us about how you kind of fast-tracked your system of innovation in Israel.
First of all, I was impressed from the TIA presentation, and I'm sure it's clearly that there is no lack of talent in South Africa. There are talented people here that can know the work. What is missing from my perspective is the ecosystem. And this is something that Israel built very strongly, and this is what helps, you know, to take it. And I think that if you look at innovation, I think the first and foremost thing from day one, they never look on the Israeli market. Maybe as a better side, but that's it. You need to think as a global, and you need to look about the market. You can say either as how I can create base here for Europe and the States, that there will be good companies here that can sell there, or to be the springboard for the rest of the continent, to create here the hubs for the technologies that will be rolled out, layout in Africa. And this is something at first that companies need to understand and to look for that. Now, in terms of investments and things like that, look, it takes time for that. And I think, you know, I think that Nixon was the one that said that the most 9 terrifying words in English is that I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And it's something that, yes, the government, you know, we usually would say that just don't interrupt with what the companies and private sector can do. But obviously with building the infrastructure, it's something that you need a government support for that. And one of the things that pushed the Israeli tech for that is that when the Israeli tech started, like at the beginning of the 90s, the Israeli government came with initiative to say, okay, we want foreign investors here in Israel, so we will create a fund that's called Yozma, it's initiative fund, that if you are an investor and you put your money, and if it's going to be successful, great, we will just take, you know, we will match the investments, and then if it will be successful, we'll take the money back. So we'll put like 50% and you will put 50%, and then everything else. But the good thing was that if it's going to fail, we won't take our money back. So basically, we're helping you to minimize the risk. So you can put like 50%, but getting the double of the money. And so the risk is minimized by that. So this is kind of initiative that helped to bring a lot of investors into South Africa, into Israel. And this is something that South Africa, I think, you know, the government level should look how they help with the infrastructure, you know, how they help with putting the infrastructure that companies can work on that, how to make it as much easier as possible. And eventually, when you have those kind of things, you can see much more better collaboration. And this is the third point that I want to emphasize is about the collaboration in Israel. Because it's a small country, it's easier, to sit together with investors and someone from the hospital and a startup, and they can talk together, and it's like very non-formal discussion. Where like in South Africa, a lot of times, like I feel there's a, you can approach someone on LinkedIn and you probably, a good scenario is that you just be ignored. Where in Israel, if you're coming and you say, okay, this is something that I want you to say, if it's interesting, people will say, okay, if not, they will say not interested. It's very direct things. And I think once you have this and you put those hubs will be the hospitals and the clinics and the doctors and companies together, you can create great things for the country.
No, thank you. And I really appreciate your emphasis on government as a facilitator in the first instance, and then the willingness of the participants to collaborate. I think those are the key ingredients that we should learn from in terms of what Israel has done. But I think you also make the point of the country being small and people easily able to connect with each other. And I think that we maybe should learn from COVID in terms of COVID forcing us indoors, as it were, and forcing us to collaborate in a way. So let's see where we go with it. So thanks for that. Okay, Dr. Phehane, over to you in terms of your presentation and of the 14 trends that you've seen. Which of those do you think that South Africa is best positioned to begin with and to take advantage of, and also to build on what you've already done based on the images you showed us of some of the success stories that you've already implemented? So which of those trends do you think we should focus on as a basis to move forward from here?
Certainly, and thank you very much for the question. So I think, more often than not, we are now hearing that as a country, we should be getting with the program as far as artificial intelligence is concerned. And this, of course, also speaks to the participation by the continent in artificial intelligence. So there have been several, presidential initiatives, and particularly the Presidential Commission on artificial intelligence. And these commissions have been set up to do precisely that, to in essence look at, the opportunity for the country, but also to consider just in terms of research and development and innovation in the country, where we are and how in essence influence policy and influence, I would dare say, investment into artificial intelligence as a discipline. And this becomes quite important, colleagues, that we look at AI because, the development of technologies, as we all know, is quite rapid. And the last thing we want is to be called as a continent the technology orphans. So my sort of, I suppose, preference is for us to look at artificial intelligence as a start. But of course, this does not take away for the need for us to look at genomics. So, as a technology innovation agency, we've made quite a substantial investment into genomics technologies through our platforms. And ultimately what this means is that, as we come up with more of these diagnostic tests, tools and kits, we should be looking at the space of precision medicine, in essence, looking at what is it about an individual that can result in the development of specific interventions that really very quickly leads to the health and better health and I suppose a recovery of these individuals from particular condition. So for me, it's really around AI, the use of genomics, but ultimately all of that will be underpinned by very strong research and development and innovation space. We can talk as much as we want around technologies around the rest of the world, but of course, if as a country, as a continent, we are not looking to invest in R&D ourselves, we're certainly bound to be left behind.
Yeah, no, well noted. And I think that last point is particularly relevant in terms of the investment that's required to grow the industry. So we'll certainly be, as SAMED, collaborating with you and looking forward to partner, especially with our local manufacturers on how we can move this forward. So thanks for that contribution. All right, so we've come to the end. I'd just like to give all the panelists an opportunity to summarize, and maybe in your summary, if you could make particular reference to the regulatory landscape, because ultimately the regulator plays an important part in terms of market access to these innovations and technologies. So if you would mind just to summarize, and I thank you all for your contribution. And in your summary, if you could just mention something about the regulatory environment as you wrap up. So thank you, guys. So maybe let's start with you, Terry, and then we'll go to Mr. Lev and then come back to Dr. Phehane.
Yeah, I'm by no means a regulatory expert, but certainly I've seen it firsthand when you need to get a product out there. But certainly I've been involved, I suppose, in some of the government initiatives here, particularly in regards to digital health. But I suppose to summarize, I think, yeah, we've obviously got some burgeoning areas for development in terms of very exciting, to be honest, areas of development in medtech coming up. And that's not just medtech improving upon what it's done so far, but I think medtech grappling with new industries such as cell and gene therapy industries, nano and robotics, but particularly nano and coatings. I think this is going to be another area which is extremely important. But coming back to what we've all been sort of talking about today, I think it's the connected health agenda and making sure that patient, clinician are joined up. And also making sure these industries recognize that there's a lot of data out there, and this data needs to be actionable. And it brings me on to sort of a question that was asked in the chat, you know, sort of on a similar vein, you know, is this actually useful? And it's not bells and whistles, but this data does need to be actionable and does need to be sort of seen by the healthcare sector as workable. There's no point producing huge amounts of data if you can't use it. The last thing a clinician wants is to be swarmed with data that isn't useful. So the end user acceptability and training, I think, is key areas for these new areas of connected health. You know, can it be used easily and adopted easily, coming on to some of Amit's points earlier. So that's sort of probably my summary and a few words of caution. In terms of regulation, well, I think the regulators need to buy into this. So we have the MHRA, obviously in the UK, and over here you've got SARPA and, you know, SARPRA, should I say, and that they need to get a grip. The MHRA, I think, in the UK, I don't know about South Africa, so hopefully they're doing exactly the same, but they are creating business units to look at AI, to look at machine learning, and to look at digital health. GDPR is less of a concern, by the way. I think that's dealt with in terms of consent and GDPR, and indeed there's obviously exclusions for use in health as well. So that may be a little bit of a distraction. But in terms of sort of the safety of devices and how you regulate safety around AI and black box technologies is being, I think, managed by our regulators at the moment. But that needs, and as the MHRA are doing, is to put in these distinct business units that look at this, break it down, and make sure that we encourage the industry to get involved in AI and machine learning and digital health technologies and telemedicine technologies, so that these can be accessed by the patient, because you know, the regulators are here to serve the patients, yes, to make sure they're safe, but also not to block innovation and adoption. So I think regulators need to work very closely with the industry, and yes, data is one part of it, but also decision making and the consistency of that decision making needs to be seen in light of these new technologies. And it's not without the wit of any of these agencies to be able to do that. But I think AI and the black box is going to provide a challenge to them. Machine learning, less so. I believe in algorithm-based decision making, I think, is far more straightforward. But the AI world, well, let's see what happens. We haven't seen a lot of AI. We've seen a lot of machine learning. We've seen a lot of algorithms. But the world of AI is going to land on us, and that's where regulators need to put their focus. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Terry, and we really appreciate that. So to the remaining two presenters, we are out of time. So if you could just quickly summarize your your final thoughts so that we can move on with our agenda. And sorry for putting you under pressure with time.
Sure.
Go ahead, Dr. Lip.
So I would just say that this is exciting times to be in the medtech industry. A lot of collaborations, a lot of opportunities, and I really hope to see as much as companies that looking for those collaborations, how to take technologies and to implement them either here or in other countries, and to find the right models for that. And this is, you know, in a lot of areas, we just talked about the tip of the iceberg. There's so many segments, so many technologies, so many potential here that could be materialized via those collaborations, and we'll be glad to support and help. About regulation, yeah, I think one of the good things about the corona, few things that goods, but that I think brought this pandemic is that the time to approve and to give the permissions for medicines and medical devices is shortened, and we see a lot of companies that doesn't take them now. A lot of, you know, the vaccines that was like a very short.
Appreciative for today in terms of your contributions, and we certainly learned a lot, and we look forward to collaborating with you in future. And I'm sure through Samet's office, we'll reach out to you guys on the different elements that we discussed today. So thank you once again.